So 3 years ago, I interviewed at Google for an internship position and absolutely embarrassed myself. Needless to say, I did not get accepted and was rejected pretty horribly. So at the time, I was just transitioning from working on a genetics PhD. Up to that point, I had taken 2 introductory courses in Java and basic computation. My childhood friend, Aaron, was doing way better in life than me. He was already a senior engineer at Facebook. And for those of you who don't know, Facebook is one of those prestigious companies that you kind of want to get into because their pay scale is really good. He was basically my mentor. And let me back up a bit. Before we even started doing those first 2 courses, he was like giving me guidance to how to write my resume for software engineering roles, which I really appreciated. So basically the timeline was around September is when you start the semester. So September was when I started those introductory courses. And before I started those introductory computer science courses, Aaron was basically telling me to apply for internships. And basically my response to that was like, are you sure? I haven't even taken like a single course yet. Is this even possible for me to do? We only just finished the resume. I did 1 hackathon, so I really didn't have that much. So I was definitely not feeling particularly confident about myself yet. So my basic game plan, so the way I was thinking about it was, this was kind of like a 5-year plan for me. Maybe in like the first 2 or 3 years, I was doing some computer science courses as well as my genetics PhD. And then maybe in like year 2 or year 3, I get my internship. And then maybe a couple internships later, I would finally get my full-time position around the 5-year mark. But Aaron was like, no, you're trying to like do this as fast as possible. Stop wasting time. Just go and apply for an internship. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure. But in my mind, I was like really scared. So I didn't actually do it. Fast forward to the end of the semester in December, I had taken the 2 courses and I did really well. I got A's on them and I was feeling a little bit more confident about myself. So I go into the meeting with Aaron, super happy that like, oh, hey, look, I got A's. I'm doing pretty well in computer science. And the first thing Aaron asked me is, did you apply for internships? And my response was, no, I didn't. And Aaron's like, dude, every company hires people during the fall, particularly US companies. You screwed yourself over. How did you not apply? All this stuff. Like you wasted the year. In hindsight now I know like in the fall is sort of where most of the hirings, like where most of the companies do their hiring for the summer. But back then I didn't know. I was like, let me just do the courses first. Let me just like sort of like get my footing in terms of computer science and then we can think about internships later on. But after he said that, I just started panicking. So I was like, okay, like what do I do? So Aaron was like, well, it's December. You can still start applying. Maybe some companies are still looking for candidates. Keep in mind, my resume at this point is like absolutely terrible. Let me show you a copy of it. If you look at my resume, it has like stuff that like is not even that relevant. It's like stuff with like genetics research, stuff that I did back with like neuroscience and things like that. And I maybe did like 1 or 2 projects. So it was like not that good. So my point is like my resume is not that good. I've only taken 2 introductory computer science courses and my childhood friend who is a senior engineer, who I trust very much, is telling me to apply for internships. So that's what I did. I kind of made another tiny mistake here. The thing is, at the time, I didn't really know about the smaller tech companies. I didn't really know about those like GitHub databases, which give you sort of the internship list for like the fall or for the summer that most people know about. Okay, so there's only a couple of companies that I actually knew about, and they were pretty much the big ones like Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. I basically just applied for like those big companies and then I kind of just forgot about it. Then on February 16th, 2021, okay, let me check my email date of confirming the interviews. On February 2nd, 2021 is when I got an email from Google saying, oh, we want to give you a phone interview. And basically this of 2 interviews back to back, where now we know it's like 30 minutes. They give you like a coding question each, and basically 2 different people interview you. And I panic. I call Aaron. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Like, I didn't actually expect them to give me an interview. So basically the first thing that Aaron tells me is, why did you apply to Google? Shouldn't you have applied to like the smaller companies and worked your way up before you like applied to the bigger company, which is like maybe the company that you really want to go to? And I was like, okay, you did not tell me that. And like, this was like miscommunication. Like you didn't tell me that. And I didn't know about those smaller companies. So I just applied to the bigger ones. Basically, the next question he asked me is, how much leak code have I done? And My answer to that was I hadn't done any leak code because I actually didn't think I was going to get an interview. Aaron was like, okay, just like go through all of these like beginner leak code questions. He sent me like these questions, and then he also sent me the like blind 75 questions. He's like, okay, do those and prepare as much as you can for the interview. Between February 2nd to February 16th, I had 2 weeks and I practiced like crazy. Like I was feeding into my head like, oh yeah, like I'm going to get like an internship in Google. Like I've only like been in computer science for like less than half a year, and I'm going to get an internship at Google. So I go to my supervisor and I tell him like, oh, I'm getting an interview at Google. Like I need to like drop things for like 2 weeks so that I can like prepare for my like Google interview. And he's like, yeah, go for it. Like, you know, like Google sounds like a very like good opportunity. Go and practice for that. And I'm like all my friends, I'm like, oh, like I'm dropping everything. I'm telling all my courses like, oh, like I need like a break. I'm going to like prepare solely for this interview. So I like went through a bunch of all-nighters, practiced a bunch of leak code questions, and I like, yes, like this is what I need to do to get ready for this interview. And after 2 weeks and many all-nighters, I feel confident and I feel a little bit sleep deprived, I'm not gonna lie, but I feel extremely ready. So the first interviewer comes and he's like, oh, hey, George, let's just get started. And I was like, from that moment on, I was like already surprised because I thought like first, like they ask you like some basic like behavioral questions. No, we go straight into the coding question. I was like, okay, fine, let's go. And basically he puts this coding question on this Google Doc and he's like, okay, so just solve this question. I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. Let me solve this question. So I read this question out loud. You ever know, like, you ever get this feeling where you're like, maybe like you're reading a book or you're reading a textbook or something, and like you're reading every single word very carefully, but when you put it together into a sentence, you still don't understand what in the world that sentence is actually telling you. That describes exactly the feeling that I had when I was reading that coding question out loud to the interviewer. So what do? Well, I read the question again. And I'm like, oh yeah, like, I was like telling the interviewer, I was like, oh, wait, I didn't get that the first time. Let me read it out loud once again. So I read it again. And I still don't understand the question. So I'm like, okay, sorry, I didn't understand it the second time. Let me just read it one more time. So I read it a third time. And then at that point, I'm like panicking. I basically give up and I'm like, okay, I'm like, I don't understand like what this question is. Like, can you, like, I asked the interviewer to kind of explain it to me, and he gives me the hint, and like, I don't understand the hint that he's giving me, but he's like giving me a hint. He's like, okay, like this is what you need to do to like get started or whatever. And I still don't understand the question. So I'm like, okay, so basically what you're telling me is like, you want me to use a hash map, right? And he's like, sure, that's what I'm telling you to do. So like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, okay, Aaron told me to use a hash table, use a hash map. That's what I'm doing. So basically I try to answer the question using a hash map, and like, okay, like in hindsight, now I know that question is like, it's obviously not a hash map question. But anyways, I try to use the hash map. I try to code the solution using a hash map. And after 30 excruciating, really long and awkward minutes, the interview finally ends. And I'm like, and at the end, I'm like, oh yeah, like I hope it went well. And the interviewer is like, yeah, like it was good. Like, he kind of had like a pause there. He's like, oh yeah, it was okay. And then we kind of like awkwardly ended the interview. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank God the interview is over. I had forgotten about the second interview. So my phone starts ringing after like 2 seconds, and I'm like, oh, like who's calling me like right after like my first interview? I'm like, oh, okay. It's like my second interview that I gotta do. So we start the process again. And what do you know? The exact same thing happens again. I'm like literally reading the words and like I'm not processing the words. My excuse is like I was like sleep deprived, but like I just like don't understand what they're saying. Like, what do they mean recursively find this node or whatever? Like, and like I repeat the question back to him. So you're telling me to find this node and get this information and then recursively get this from this tree. Am I getting this right? And the interviewer is like, yes. But in my mind, I'm like, I do not understand a single thing that I repeated back to him. He's saying yes, but I don't really know what he's saying yes to. And I don't really know what I just said. After an hour, the 2 interviews painfully end. And I'm like, let me just take a break. That was terrible. I thought I was like so prepared for these interviews, but obviously not. So I'm just trying to like take a breather and just trying to like decompress, calm down. And then I get another call and I'm like, wait a second. Is there like a third interview for Google? Like, did I like misread the email? What's going on? And then when I see like Aaron's phone number, I'm like, oh, thank God. I don't have another interview that I have to do. Like, I was like starting to freak out again. And then Aaron calls me and he's like, oh, how'd it go? And I was like, yeah, pretty good. Like, I used the hash map. Anyways, the point of the story is, yes, like failed, and I failed terribly on my first interview. Probably I failed worse than what most people would experience on sort of their like first interview experience for whatever software engineering opportunity. And it was at Google. So like, I don't know if they put me into a blacklist or anything, because in my future interviews, I never passed a single interview. So I don't know if they put me into a blacklist, but needless to say, it was very embarrassing and like kind of a little bit traumatizing. But after I sort of like calmed down for a bit, I just like had some time to like think to myself, and I was like, you know what? It's fine. I feel like a lot of people have a fear in the beginning of trying to apply because they're worried about this result. But once you experience it, you're like, you know what? It was embarrassing. Didn't go well. I didn't get into Google, which would have been like a dream to like get an internship so early in my software engineering career. But I was like, it's fine. At least now I know my resume is, even though it was awful, I was like, it's good enough at least to get an interview. So all I have to do is just work really hard for the next couple of years, or maybe even the next like half a year to a year. And let's just go through this process again. And I know that eventually with enough hard work, I was going to be able to get the internship that I wanted. And eventually I was able to do that, and was able to do the Amazon internship and then get a full-time offer. And now I'm a full-time software engineer. But my point is that if I never started applying early, then I never would have gotten that experience, and I never would have known that, like, yes, this gives me the confidence to know, like, okay, it's not rocket science. As long as I work hard, as long as I keep practicing, I'll be able to get there.